those methods. So we're going to actually work on defining a method in this lesson and then calling methods. So we're going to get into all those details. First, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to call it learning methods. Learning methods. And it's going to have this public static void main method in there. That's one thing we're going to take a look at pretty soon. It's coming. So again, this is the starting point of the program. We need this method to do anything in Java. And this is the starting point, and line by line, the code is executed. Okay? So when you print something to the screen, and you give some details here as to what to print, you're actually invoking a method. And that method is called println or println. And you've also already seen the print. That's another method. All right. And there are some other methods, but you've seen these two so far. So when we put some gibberish in here, or whatever it is, we give it some data. This is actually referred to as an argument. We are giving this method an argument. We're giving it some data. And what is it going to do with that data? Well, this method's purpose, this method's reason for existence, this method's responsibility is to print to the screen. So that's what it does. Let's hit play here. And of course, it's printing to the screen the argument that we are passing it. So this is a predefined method in the Java language. And if you press the control key and click on system, this will take you to this class. And there's all of these methods in here. So we're not going to get into this right now, but it's something for you to visit later on towards the more advanced topics in the course when we get there. But basically, this is a class, and this method belongs to this variable called out. And this variable is actually in the system class. Now notice the data type for this variable. The data type is called print stream. And if you were to press control and click on print stream, that's actually another class. I'm going to leave that to you to explore on your own, but we're going to be revisiting this after you learn about object orientation. But as you learn this stuff, I'm going to slowly start to introduce certain concepts to you, and hopefully as you approach the middle of the course, all of this is going to start to make total sense. And again, all of these special keywords such as public, final, and static, don't get intimidated by these. We're going to cover these in great detail coming soon. But anyway, let's move on. So we're going to take a look at how to define our own methods. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to, outside of this main method definition, I'm actually going to create another method. And we're going to use a very similar syntax to what we've seen. Public, static, void. And I'm just going to make this method print some stuff. So I'm going to call it print some junk. Okay. So this is the method name. And inside of here, this is where the body of the method is going to go. And we have to give the instructions on what to do when we call this method. Just like we're calling this one, when we call this method, it's going to do what is listed as instructions in the body of it. So what I want this method to do is basically just print to the screen some blah, blah, blah. Okay? This is just to explain to you a point. This is, of course, not a real-world method, but it'll give you a good understanding of what this thing is. So if we invoke, when we call this method, we can call this method inside of this one. Like that, okay? So inside of the main method, this is the starting point of the program. Everything happens line by line, right? So the first line of instruction in the main method is to invoke the println method, and we give this particular argument. So this method does what it's supposed to. It prints. And then we invoke one of our own methods, which is out here, outside of the main method, in the same learning methods class, but it's outside of the main method. We've defined this print some junk. So I'm calling it by just literally just typing the method name and then putting these parentheses. So when I hit run, notice that this is the output of calling our print some junk method, okay? Now notice that this print line method takes an argument. So we can actually do the same thing. We can pass an argument to some print junk method. So if I pass in something, this is actually not going to work. This is some data. All right, this is not going to work. If you hover your mouse here, it's saying the method print some junk is the type of blah, 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 is not applicable for the arguments string. So we're passing in a string here, and this method is not applicable to be able to take that as an argument. So the reason is because we haven't defined the arguments here. Okay, we've given, this is the method definition. So we need to actually let this method definition know that, hey, when I pass an argument, you should accept that. Right now, inside of these parentheses, it's not accepting anything. And I'll prove that to you. If you hover, let's take a look at the print line method. Press the control key and then click on print line. And notice this is the print line method. So notice that it's in the parentheses, there's something there, all right? And that's exactly what we need to define in our method in the print some junk. So I'm just going to give this method the ability to accept an argument. Like that. So this method accepts an argument of type string. All right, and this is just a a variable that I've come up with that represents the argument. I can name it arg, or any legal variable name could represent the argument. And what is going to happen is the data that we pass into this when we call it, this data, right, this string is going to be assigned to this variable inside of this method, and we can use this variable to do all kinds of things. So for now, I'm just going to leave a handy name such as argument. And now this the compiler is not complaining about any issues, right? In these parentheses, we're mentioning what type of data this method can accept, and that's the kind of data that we are sending it, okay? It doesn't really do anything with that data, because if I just hit play here, notice it didn't do anything with this is some data, this argument that we're passing. It's still doing what it was doing before. So I can use this variable inside of this method to do various things. For example, I can append whatever's passed into this to this some blah blah blah. Okay, so let's hit play and notice that it appended what we passed in. It appended that to the end of what was already there. Okay, so here's an example of the argument being used for something inside of the method body. And whatever I type here, I could say, hello, my name is Imtiaz. I expect this to be appended to the end of this some blah blah blah. Okay, so let's hit play and notice that's exactly what's going on here. Now, of course, the string is connected to the previous one, so we want to put a space there, and that will separate out my argument from what's already there in the string. So let's hit play and notice that it is in fact separated. Okay. Now, another important thing is I'm passing in a string here. What if I decide to pass in some number, for example, 34? We've got a problem. Okay. If you hover your mouse over here, notice that it's saying the method print some junk is not applicable for the argument int. All right, it's saying is not applicable for the arguments int. And the reason for that is, of course, the argument that it accepts is supposed to be of type string, and we are passing in an integer. So this is illegal. It's basically what it's doing is it's trying to take this number and assign it to this argument variable. And remember, you can't assign data to the incorrect data type, right? If I have a variable called, let's define a variable real quick, a string, we'll call it var. I can give it an empty string. I could give it, stuff in words, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as I try to assign it a number, we've got a problem, right? Hover your mouse here and it's saying type mismatch, cannot convert from int to string. So that's exactly what's going on here when we're trying to pass a 34. This is not a string, this is an integer. And this method is only supposed to accept arguments of type string. So of course this is an illegal invocation. It's not even going to compile. Now what we can do is sort of, we can of course put quotations around it, but that's of course going to be a string. If you wanted this method to accept integers, right, you would have to create another one, and we can put int here. And now notice that it's not complaining, because the compiler is smart enough to know that this is an integer that I'm passing. So it's going to check through all your methods and see, okay, this prints some junk, even though they're named the same, but the kind of argument that it accepts, this version accepts an integer. So it's going to know the correct version to call. It's not going to call the string version. It's going to call the integer version, because that's what we're passing here. So let's hit play and notice that it prints the number 34. And just so that we can confirm that this in fact is the one that's being called, I'm going to change this. I'm going to say integer passed in. So hit play and notice it's saying integer passed in. So this method is being invoked, not this one. If I put quotations around this number, now it's officially a string, because the quotations, it's going to invoke this one because that's the string argument. Let's hit play and notice that it's invoking the first one with the blah, blah, blah. All right. So you might be wondering, with this print line method, we have this other stuff, right? Why do we have to reference this system.out thing? Well, system is a class, so we can create our own classes. And since print some junk is defined within the same class, I don't need to give any prefixes, but let's actually go over a quick example of what it would look like if I defined these methods in another class. I'm going to right click here and go to new class, and I'm going to call it myUtils. Utils stands for utilities, utility methods. So I'm just going to name it myUtils, and I'm going to define some other methods in there. And for this, we do not need the public static void main in here, right? So I'm not going to select that. Hit finish. The reason for that is I'm going to use this class in this learning methods class. Let me close this. I'm going to use this myUtils class that I just created. I'm going to use this class inside of learning methods class. And this is the starting point of my program. It starts from this main method, goes line by line, executing each line of code. If I take these methods, let me cut them out of here and put them into this class. And let's go back. Notice that it's complaining. Hover your mouse here and it's saying the method print some junk is undefined for the type learning methods. The reason for that is it's saying it's undefined. It's not defined in learning methods class. The reason is, guess what? We defined it in the myUtils class. So to be able to access that, we could do myUtils dot print some junk. Okay, and that's why this print line method has some stuff before it, because it's not defined in this class, it's defined someplace else. And we are doing a similar thing. Our print some junk method is defined in the myUtils class. Now there are some other hairy stuff that's going on with this print line method. You can think of this as being defined in someplace else. I'm grossly simplifying where this method is, but just understand that it's not in this class. I just wanted you to be able to see that you can invoke methods on other objects, other classes. So we're doing myUtils dot, and then we're invoking this. So it's somewhat of a similar illusion to what you're seeing with the system.out.println. It's of course a very different scenario, but as you get more comfortable with Java, you're going to see many different scenarios in which you can define your methods. So let's define some more methods. I'm going to go back to my utils class, and I'm going to define a method that is able to sum two numbers, okay? So we're going to do public static void. So we're going to go into all the details of what each one of these keywords mean. Right now, I just want you to get the general idea of methods and classes in Java and all of this, the rest of the keywords we're going to cover in great detail later. So public static void, and I'm going to say sum two numbers, okay? And I give two numbers as the argument. The first argument is going to be the first, and I'll just call it arg. You can name it anything. And the second argument is going to be called second arg. All right. Absolutely no creativity there in terms of naming these, but you can name these whatever you want. So what this is going to do is going to print, it's going to print the result of summing both of these together, okay? So we could do first arg plus second arg. And that's all this thing is going to do. So let's copy this and invoke it in our class. And let's give it two numbers. And the first number I'm going to give, well, firstly, make sure that we mention where it's coming from, and that is myutils dot. There you go. Now it recognizes. So notice that it gives the method name here, and it's saying that it accepts two arguments, the first arg and the second arg. So let's give it the first arg. I'm going to say that is the number 10, and the second arg is going to be the number 23. So it's supposed to print the result of adding both of these together. So let's hit play and notice that here it is. It adds 10 with 23, and the result, of course, is 33. So far so good. Let's go back. I'm going to define one more method, but this time it's not going to print anything. So it's public static void, and I'm going to call it add 10. So it's going to add the number 10 to whatever is passed in. So I'm going to say some argument. Now these are also called parameters. The actual variable, this first arg, is a variable that can be used within the body of this method. That's also referred to as a parameter. Same thing goes with this. But when we are talking about arguments, when we invoke by passing in data, we typically refer to these as arguments. And when you go to the definition of the method, these are typically referred to as parameters. But the naming convention, in terms of how you say these things, is not very important. You just have to understand the big picture. So what this method is going to do is going to just add the number 10 with some argument, okay? So I could do some argument plus 10. And what is it going to do with the result of this calculation? And what do I want this to do? I want this method to return the result of adding both of these together. So I'm going to create a variable called result, all right? And I'm assigning the calculation, whatever is the result, we're assigning it to this variable. And of course, it's going to complain we haven't given it a data type. So we need to, of course, define the variable first, okay? So I'm defining the variable here, declaring it. This is the variable name. I'm assigning the calculation. And now what I want is for this to be returned to the caller. And I'll explain to you exactly what that means. So for here, what I'm going to do is return result. And there's going to be an error as soon as I do this. Hover your mouse here, and it's saying void methods cannot return a value. Very important to keep in mind. Void methods cannot return a value. And it gives two options to fix this. It's saying these are the two quick fixes. One of them is change the method return type to int, or we just remove the return. So what's going on here is, again, void methods cannot return a value. And what kind of method is this? Look at that. The void is highlighted there for us. So this method is not going to return anything. It's not meant to. It's meant to do things like these guys are. These guys are doing things, but they're not actually returning anything. Let me explain to you what that means. First, we need to get rid of this void, and we need to give a data type here. So now this is a legal, compiling code, and it works. What's going on here is the result is of course of type int, isn't it? So we're returning that result. So this right here, this int that we put right before the method name, this is the return type. Very important to keep in mind, this is the return type of this method. So when this method is called, wherever it's called, it's going to return the result. And the data that is sent out is going to be of type integer. Okay? If I change this to string, this is going to complain. It's going to say, hey, wait a minute. You're saying you want to return result. Result is an integer. Why are you making this method's return data type to be string? It should be int. So we have to change this back to int. And now the squiggly line, that error is gone. So what exactly is it returning here? What does return mean? Let's go over that right now. Let's go back, and I'm going to just comment these out. We've already covered these. And I'm going to do myutils dot, take a look at all the methods we have in that class. Add number, add 10. So let's click that, and I'm going to give some arguments such as 99. Okay, so now this method is supposed to execute. It's supposed to return 99 plus the number 10, right? That's as per the rules that we've defined in this method, right? These are the instructions. So it's going to return 109. So where is it going to return? Well, let's hit play and notice that nothing is printed to the screen. The reason for that is, are we asking it to print anything to the screen? Let's go back to the method. We're not asking it to print to the screen. These methods are printing to the screen. We are asking them to print using these print line methods, right? What is the duty of the print line method? It's supposed to print to the screen. This method is not printing anything. It's just returning. Returning means something totally different than printing. Let me explain to you. I can run this as many times as I want. Nothing is going to be printed to the screen. And the reason is, this method is doing its job, but it returns a value that has not been captured. So let's capture that value first. I'm going to define a variable called myVar. If I uncomment this, sum two numbers, remember sum two numbers was just printing. It wasn't returning anything. If I try to do the same thing, if I try to do int sum var, it's going to complain, right? Because we cannot, whatever this does, it does not return. That's why we can't capture the value that it returns into this variable. Hover your mouse over here and notice that it's saying this type mismatch cannot convert from void to int, okay? Cannot convert from void to int. If you look at sum two numbers method right here, this is a void method, right? It's not an int method, it's a void. It doesn't return anything. So even if I define this to be of type void, it's not going to work because void is not a valid data type. Hover your mouse here and it's saying void is an invalid type for the variable. Okay, so this is an illegal variable declaration. This data type does not exist for variables. So let's make that int, and notice that it's complaining. Hover your mouse here, it's saying type mismatch cannot convert from void to int. So of course this can only print to the screen. It does not have this return keyword in the body of this method. And it does not have some data type that is returnable. Okay, it has void. It does not have int or string or anything like that. So let's go back here. So now this invoking add 10 is supposed to return us the number 109, and that 109 is going to be assigned to this variable myvar. Great. So is anything going to be printed to the screen? Well, let's take a guess. Let's run this application and notice that it's printing 33. Oh, okay, that's because I have this uncommented. Let me add the comment there. And by the way, I clicked on Control / to add the comment there. All right, that's a shortcut to keep in mind. But anyway, now when I run it, notice that there's nothing showing up on the screen because, yet again, we're not asking it to print anything. It returns, we capture the value, and that's it. So let's print to the screen by doing system.out.println, and then we print myvar. And now in using this method this method's job is to print to the screen, right? It's going to print our variable. So hit play and notice that it prints 109. So I hope that makes sense. The difference between the void return type and any other data type return type. Let's go back to myutils. This is the void return type, meaning nothing is going to be returned from these. Okay, this one returns an int, and we have to use this return keyword to state that it's going to return whatever it is that it's doing. So let's go back here. Another thing you could do is this returns some value, right? I can add data. So now whatever this returns plus 1000, whatever this calculation equals, that's going to be assigned to my var. Because remember, whatever is to the right of the equal sign, that's what gets done first. I can have a huge calculation here. We're adding this 1000 to the result of this method call. This returns a 109. We're adding 1000, then we're subtracting 50. All of this needs to be done first. Whatever this equals is then going to be assigned to my var. Okay, so let's hit play and notice that it's giving 1059. That's the expected value that should be returned. So just like how this method is returning a value that is of type integer, I want you to modify this print sum junk method. Let's go back to myutils. I want you to modify this print sum junk method to return the argument that was passed into. Okay, so take a moment, pause the video, try this out on your own, and then when you're done, you can resume to watch my solution. All right, so hopefully you took a shot at completing that. We have two options. We can either modify this method or modify this one. Since this is an integer argument, I want to modify this one because it's supposed to return whatever's passed into it, and I want the string to be returned. So we're of course going to get rid of the void here and change this to the string data type. That's what's going to be returned from this method. Hover your mouse over this error and it's saying add a return statement. Since this method is no longer void, it needs to return type of string. So let's click on add return statement, and it returns the argument that was passed in. And I'm just going to comment this out. We don't need that anymore. So let's go back here and invoke this this method right here. And I'm going to comment these out. We've already seen these. So again, if I run this right now, nothing is going to get printed to the screen because this method is now returning. It's not printing anything to the screen. So to print to the screen, we of course need a sysout system.out print statement, and we could just dump that right here as the argument. So to the println method, we are passing this method invocation as the argument. Okay, whatever this returns is being passed into the argument of this, and this method's job is to print to the screen, and it will do that rightfully so. So let's hit play and notice that it's printing this string 34. I can pass in whatever here. Hello there. And it's going to print that to the screen. Let's hit play and notice it's doing that. So my voice is given out. This was a long lesson, a lot of ground we covered. So let's wrap it up here. And in the next lesson, we're going to get into some more fun stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.